as a filmmaker, a lot of my work is centered on the intersections of Blackness and womanhood and girlhood, and how we kind of view the world from that perspective and that standpoint.
I think the idea of the queendom in this context and the larger context in the art world and outside of the art world, I think to me it means that the power of the matriarch is not to be underestimated. I think with that space that Alexandria was able to carve out, it's a space that we don't see a lot in art spaces.
With Alexandria Eregbu, we also interviewed artists who participated in her How to Build a Queendom curatorial project. And these artists are, briefly, I'll just say Briana and Lola.
Hey Lola, hey Briana. I think that first and foremost, certainly I can do an introduction, but I would love for you each to introduce yourselves. Like, tell us a little bit about first your work that was in the show, How to Build a Queendom, and then secondly, like just a little bit about yourself, the type of work that you do in general. Okay.
I'll go first. Hello there. I am a daughter of a Yoruba man and the daughter of a Southside Chicago woman. I think both of these identities come together and kind of inform my way of thinking and navigating through this world. A lot of what I'm making is in results of that upbringing or that influence of these two cultures of color kind of coming together. And so I make sculptures, I make objects, I make objects of rest, I make arrangements. I think my interest lies within the haptic. And so with the work I contributed to How to Build a Queendom, I focus more on the throne aspect, the seated area of the kind of traditional hierarchy of what a queen could be or should be. And so that to me, of course, rendered in the thought of a stool or a rest area. I had focused on stools in my own practice as a way to uplift and give rest to objects that I was making. A lot of these stools are designed with the thought and influence of West African interior design culture and spiritual practices in mind. And so those stools were based off of the Maliki stool and other kind of fertility stools. Some of them were fabricated or purchased, and some of them were handmade by me. Most of them were handmade by me using clay. And so that is kind of the realm of material I am working with in regards to sculpture is ceramic, but a lot of that also comes out in metalworking.
Thank you, Lola. I think maybe after we hear from Briana as well, we can come back to you to learn more about, the kind of research that went into forming your work, right? And thanks for letting us know your background and how that influences how you think in the world, right? And process things. Hi, Briana.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Now me having to go after Lola being so eloquent. So my name is Briana Clearly. I identify as a filmmaker and a community curator. I create a lot of programming with the focus of like bringing people together with a very specific intention. Um, uh, a lot of what I do, overall, I feel like the through line with all that I do is like creating connection. As a filmmaker, a lot of my work is centered on the intersections of Blackness and womanhood and girlhood, and how we kind of view the world from that perspective and that standpoint. Um, and so right now, I think I'm focusing a lot on how to bring my curatorial practice and my filmmaking practice together, while also expanding into other forms of artistry. And so, being a part of How to Build a Queendom was like my first time ever being what I consider a gallery girly. So I decided to show some of my personal archive of Instax photos, um, via what I call memory mobile. So it's very similar to, the baby mobiles that you see in the crib, but with photos. And, my whole idea behind it was just to create something that was visceral, created a visceral reaction, something that was interactive. And so, um, I still got to work on the specs and the science aspect of it to get it just right. But ultimately, I was really happy with how people were able to engage with it. And so, yeah, I'm just looking forward to doing more of that, capturing more things, and sharing more of what I'm capturing, and allowing people to see themselves through the way that I see them. So.
I'm really very much interested in your work because you mentioned film, photography, and archives, and I want to know to what extent does working with archives, researching, play in your practice, because I know that there's a lot of history, a lot of information that have been silenced, and a lot of social, I like to use the word social codes that haven't been accentuated. How do you use these materials, in the production of your work as a curator? Because I see a lot of cross-pollination of elements, from what you've said in your practice. So can you briefly highlight how this pan out in your work as an artist and as a curator?
Yeah, I think so. I'm working on my first feature documentary, and that requires, so this is really the first time I've been like, okay, let me kind of learn some more things. Let me, listen to some books. Let me really kind of build out my context, because obviously, I have my own experience, but that in of itself is anecdotal, even if it is parallel to a lot of the experiences of people who identify as women, people who have been conditioned as, Black girls. But I also think I'm in a space where I'm creating archive, understanding that as a filmmaker, I am contributing to the canon of like Black womanhood, Black feminism, and Blackness diasporically. So I think that that's also where I'm at, and being really thoughtful and considerate about the fact that these moments that I'm capturing, well, I'm essentially kind of like immortalizing these very regular moments that we have. And it's so interesting to be doing that in a time of digital media and social media where everybody's doing this. But I also think that there's just something to, again, being super thoughtful about that, and also having the avenue of film to actually be able to share these things and it not just sit in my phone, although a lot of it is currently. But yeah, having it with the intent to like, okay, let's share these things. And so, yeah, that's where I've been is, what am I creating that is adding to that canon, adding to that history, that people can look back on and be like, man, I remember that moment.
Are there? Oh, I'm sorry. You should go.
Oh no, I want you to ask your question, but I was just going to say, like, not to put you on blast, Briana, but you have literally hundreds and hundreds at this point of like Polaroids of, you know,
her piece was the community. Installation.
It was an installation, at the exhibition, but that installation was literally just a fraction of what Briana has as far as you know, just that representation of us, you know, presently, currently living and playing, you know, in the city of Chicago and sort of beyond. So,
lovely. Briana, I was just curious if there have been some artists, either from, you know, the African diaspora, if I could put it that way. What I really mean by that is people of African descent, or like blacks in the USA or in Africa or in the Caribbean. I'm getting used to these other terms. I'm just so used to always saying Africa, and that's it. And everybody else is a person of African descent. And so people from like South America and all, they're like, hello, we're here too. You know, but really, like, so from these backgrounds, have there been any artists whose works have interested you in terms of like historical context, or maybe looking at their materials, their archives have also inspired, you know, the things that you're coming up with? Just curious.
No, I mean, honestly, I am still learning about things historically. I'm very much like what's happening right now. And I do appreciate history for context. I think history for context is super important, but I only dabble. And so because of that, it gives me an opportunity to then find people who are really interested in history and archival.
So maybe some of your favorite artists who have inspired your work so far, are they more of like contemporary artists?
Yeah, they're more like I grew up with them, or I'm discovering them now. One person that a couple of people who I think about, because as a filmmaker, I'm an experimental filmmaker. So people who I think about right off the top of my head are like Terrence Nance, who did Random Acts of Blindness, Boots Riley, who did I'm a Virgo, and also what's that movie?
I think the question I'm going to ask is for both of you, and you have been involved with this project, and I wanted to ask, what does this Queendom mean to both of you, and to what extent would you want to stretch it?
I think the idea of the Queendom in this context, in a larger context, in the art world and outside of the art world, I think to me it means that the power of the matriarch is not to be underestimated. I think with that space that Alexandria was able to carve out, it's a space that we don't see a lot in art spaces. A lot of the spaces we do enter as Black women artists who would consider themselves a part of a queendom, or a community of powerful women, powerful matriarch. These spaces are not always inviting. They're not always comfortable to be in. They're not always for us. I feel a lot of the times invisible in these spaces. So I think creating an exhibition like How to Build a Queendom gives us some type of autonomy in how we see ourselves in these worlds, and how we don't see ourselves in these worlds. I think my focus was to create an altar of rest using these stools to kind of point at the labor that goes underestimated in the matriarch, the Black matriarch. And so I took that as a moment to kind of commemorate that labor and that invisibility with that altar. And so I don't know, it can go a lot of different ways. I think that's kind of where my understanding of the Queendom lies and how I see it in the realms of my own practice. But I'll be interested to hear what Briana thinks of it.
Thank you.
Briana?
Yeah. Thank you for using the word redefining, because I think that that's important. So when I think of Queendom and what that means to me, it's this idea of service. It's an idea of support, safety, a lot of S words. But yeah, well, I feel like the exhibition was really an extension of friendship, and sisterhood and love. I mean, that's what I experienced. And just even getting a call to do this as someone who's never shown anything in a gallery, I mean, outside of a film. And we were supposed to show a film, and it was just like, hey, this is not working. So to kind of like lean into just like this one thing that I created, and be supported in that. So that's often what I think about when I think about, okay, Queendom and community building and cultivating, is really a space where we're talking about how can we be in service to each other? How can we show up for each other and support each other personally, professionally, creatively?
I remember when we were discussing before we started about that African concept of bringing up a kid, not just by one person, by the community. I think it also resonates in their creative process, building a community where everybody's sharing, sharing ideas, accessing archival materials, because the archive is also a community of memories, of past histories, a community of silenced voices. So I think that's also what this project it's all about, which is also a very laudable one. Getting these talents, these immense creative people together to, begin to speak to different societal, not just societal vices, but challenges that affect women, globally. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that I consider her like one of my mothers as far as like in creative spirit. Sobonfu Somé, she has this lecture that she calls A Mother World is Possible, where she introduces like the concept of having multiple mothers in Dagara culture specifically, but something that sort of exists, as you mentioned earlier, throughout the continent. It's a shared value. And it, really this exhibition kind of came at the heels of me culminating my thesis research, thinking about this concept of mother telling and revising the poor image, which to me, Briana and Lola really spoke to this really beautifully. The fact that there's so much propaganda, there's so much conditioning and things out there that really dehumanizes Black women. And so my work through the thesis and as part of translating what took place in the thesis and into something that can exist in the real world through this exhibition, really sought to use the wisdom and like leadership of some of these scholars, including Mama Somé and Bell Hooks I mentioned earlier, Alice Walker, et cetera, Louisa Tiche. I would say those are kind of my top.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming to
so
our studio here at the Program of African Studies in Evanston. Thank you so much for
your contributions.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you all for having us.
It's a wrap.